to follow. And so encouraging counselors begins with asking them, how do you respond when one of your peers on the staff expresses themselves? Do you characterize that as baby-like? Do you characterize it as stereotypically feminine? Or do you encourage it just by saying, hey man, that sounds like it was a tough moment. What happened? What did that parent actually say to you? Okay, so this is a difficult conversation to have with your staff, but here's the good news. It doesn't take more than a few strong leaders at a place like a camp or a summer school to change the culture there and to encourage the expression of emotions. And this is strong, appropriate expression of emotions. The other way that I want to see this manifest at camps and other youth programs is in the dining hall, on the sports field, or anywhere else where emotions are running hot, right? So let's take a sports example. When you've got some counselors out on the sports field and you've got some kids out there playing, there's going to be a winning team and there's going to be a losing team. Maybe you're doing some kind of new game where, like blob tag, everybody wins. But let's take a typical scenario, volleyball or something like that. And it doesn't matter whether it's boys camp or girls camp or a co-ed camp. I think we need to be cognizant of the example we set. Let's say that you're the coach of the team that ends up losing. How do you respond? I guarantee that as the winning point is executed, whether that's the winning run crossing home plate or that's the winning spike over the net, all of the kids on both the winning and the losing teams are going to look over at the youth leaders. They're going to look at your counselors. They're going to look at the supervisory staff. They want to know, how does the winning team's coach respond and how does the losing team's coach respond? And they're going to key their response as boys and girls to how the men and women in that setting respond. So I think it's perfectly appropriate for the coach of the losing team or the counselor who's working with the team who just lost to bring everybody in and say something like, you know, I'm disappointed, or I feel a little sad because we all worked really hard. We ended up on the short end of the stick, but that's okay, right? So in that case, the counselor is modeling resilience. The counselor is expressing themselves and saying that they feel sad or disappointed or angry if they feel like the referee made a bad call. But they need to hear you say that. And this is the way you create an emotionally healthy culture and a healthy culture of masculinity at your camp. How do you do that? You discuss these scenarios. Pre-season during staff training, when you bring your staff together for your full staff meetings each week, you talk about some of the ways in which your staff responds to one another and respond to the things that happen at camp. And you make sure that they feel free to say what's on their mind and that they're supported by their peers. Because as I started out saying in response to this question, if they're shut down by their peers or they're too afraid to express themselves, it's not going to happen. All right, next question. These are great ones. It says, hey Chris, can you talk about the challenges of getting college-age counselors to think of themselves as men? They seem to think of themselves as guys, which inhibits their ability to be strong masculine role models. Wow. All right, so, you know, my first thought about that relates to the personal narrative. And this is an interesting distinction, right? This is not one that I've thought a lot about, the distinction between a guy and a man. Because I think for your college-age staff, when you say the word man, they're thinking of their dad, or they're thinking of one of their teachers, or maybe a college professor, but definitely somebody older, somebody who's got a little gray like I have. In many ways, it's important that they see a distinction between them as young men, college age, and older men. You know as well as I do that the boys and girls, the young people in your camp or summer school or other youth serving program, they connect well with this college age crowd because the college age crowd is more in touch with pop culture. They know the cool expressions. They are agile athletes and artists, and in the kids' eyes, let's face it, they're cooler than somebody like me who's 43. They're cooler than the director who has this kind of vaulted position of authority at the camp. So I would begin by celebrating the fact that they do happen to be younger men, college age, and ask them, what are the ways in which you think this is special? What are the ways in which you are connecting best, with your campers or the young people we serve? Then I would ask them, how do they define the difference between a man and a guy? What do those two words mean? Why do they mean slightly different things? Then I would ask them, what about the word man makes you feel comfortable and do you embrace? And what about the word man makes you feel kind of uncomfortable, like, listen, Mr. or Mrs. Director, you're telling us that we need to set a healthy role model, that we need to be a healthy man for our boy participants. But we don't like that so much. We're not sure, why, but we're uncomfortable with this label of man. Well, let's process that. Let's ask them, what about the word man makes you a little bit uncomfortable? Why is guy more comfortable? So that's good. You're going to learn something. I would learn something if I were privy to this discussion. Okay, so that's one thing. Or that's two things, actually. I suppose the next piece that I would want you to consider with your staff is just how important older role models are. So while they may be college age, they may be, slightly younger, and in that way making a better connection with their campers or with the children that you serve, they still have this tremendous responsibility. And the young people who attend your program are watching every move your staff make. They're listening to what they're saying. They are watching how they dress. They're watching how they behave on the sports field, in the dining hall, and in every other place at your camp or program. And someday, many of them are going to be parents, fathers. They are going to have to be what they imagine now is a man. One of the challenges that you can pose to them is, what do you want to do now as a surrogate parent that will give you good practice and be a best practice for what you have planned later in your life? When you are the CEO of an organization, when you are a husband or father, what is that going to entail? I'll tell you that I was a very different youth development professional before I had kids of my own than I am now. There's nothing that can substitute for the potency of parenthood. And when you've experienced it, you view your responsibility as a youth leader differently. We can't, and I wouldn't want to make our counselors parents right away, right? But I do want to get them in touch with the possibility that they might be a parent sometime in the future. So when I look at this question, and it says, talk about the challenges of getting college-age counselors to think about themselves as men. Part of it is a little bit of a Peter Pan phenomenon. They don't want to grow up. But I want to open their eyes up to the fact that they will grow up and that some of them will be parents or they'll have other positions of responsibility. And I just want to ask them, so what are the implications now, today, for how you treat these young people? You as a guy right now, if that's the label you're most comfortable with, are showing these boys what they're going to grow into. And you as a guy are going to grow into being a man. How do we do this in healthy ways? Right? And one of Michael Thompson's points in the video that most of you had a chance to watch was there's a risk that we can slip into unhealthy role modeling. And so we want to think about, what would we like these boys to become? Do we want them to be violent, misogynistic, and taciturn, or do we want them to be, peaceful and interactive and expressive. So if we want these boys to become healthy guys and men, what are the implications for what we do now? How do we interact with one another? And there are some very subtle things that we do that point boys in the wrong direction. Michael Thompson talks about some of these in the video, and there are others that he doesn't talk about that I see all the time. Some of the words that we use. I have an article that's going to be published in the May-June issue of Camping magazine that talks about language. And one of the things that that I think sort of seeps into a camp culture that doesn't portray men or masculinity in a healthy light are labels. For example, calling a white tank top a wife beater and making reference to domestic violence without really even thinking about it. Calling a boy who is not a particularly good athlete or who doesn't dare to do a ropes course element a pussy, and saying, wow, if you actually stop to think about it, we're making references to violence, or we're making crude references to female anatomy, and what we're doing is we're saying this is unhealthy, or this is what we look down on. We disparage women. And masculinity is not something that's to be built on the shoulders of women. We can cultivate masculinity in healthy ways without putting down the other sex. And I think you want to get your counselors talking about that, because even if you have an all-boys camp, I bet that there are some women on staff, and I certainly know that they're going to be having contact with women on their nights off and days off. And so the ways in which your staff choose words and discuss both men and women will make a huge difference in the education that you're providing and in the quality of role models that you're providing. Okay? Let's look at the next question here. What challenges should camp directors be looking for on-site, i.e. behaviors of campers or counselors during the camp season that may negatively impact camp's ability to be a powerful force for positive youth development? Well, that's obviously a central question here, one that Michael Thompson tries to answer in the video, and I hinted at or began talking about in reference to the last question. Again, what challenges should camp directors be looking for on-site, such as behaviors of campers or counselors during the camp season that may negatively impact camp's ability to be a powerful force for positive youth development? Well, the first would be what I was talking about a minute ago, and that's language. What words are your staff using to express themselves? What labels, verbal labels, are they using to characterize different kinds of behavior? So if we stick with language for a minute, I think you want to completely eliminate from the language that your staff are using words like pussy, wife beater. I've heard staff say to other staff, when the staff are facing a challenge, oh, take off your skirt. And again, it's a very disparaging reference to females, in this case, female dress. Maybe some of you call out your staff when they say things like that. Maybe you don't. But all of you should be, and all of you should be training your senior staff to respond to language that you would characterize as sexist or inappropriate in some other way. So that would be sort of step one. Listen for the language that staff are using. That's a negative behavior that promotes an unhealthy culture. And you don't have to blow a gasket if you overhear a staff member say to another staff member, take off your skirt, or if someone says, I can't believe you don't dare to do that. One kid calls another kid a pussy. But you do need to respond, and that's what's key. You need to say something like, hang on, I know you didn't mean to be offensive, but the way you just said that was pretty offensive, and I want you to just think about what it is that you're saying. when I've called kids out for, or staff, for using the expression wife beater to denote a white tank top, most of them say, oh, I never thought that that was a reference to domestic violence. I never thought that that was disparaging toward both men and women. So a brief conversation where you don't raise your voice, but you heighten their consciousness, their awareness of what it is that they're saying, is a phenomenal and I think, fantastic practice. You have to be vigilant. So that's one thing. The next thing I would ask you to look out for when we're talking about sort of negative behaviors, be on the lookout for the ways in which the boys and men in your at your camp dress. And I don't mean, do they wear Speedos or do they wear surf shorts, to general swim. I don't care about that. I don't care about fashion fads. But I do care about what's written on T-shirts. And, Michael Thompson makes reference to the kind of Clint Eastwood character of Dirty Harry and, pointing a gun at you, go ahead, make my day. And I think that, if the T-shirt says, go ahead, make my day, or glorifies violence in some way, you want to ask that staff person or that camper to go change their shirt. Most of us have some sort of policy at our camps about, clothing that makes reference to drugs or alcohol. So somebody has the shirt with the marijuana leaf on it, and you say, you know what, that's not appropriate, would you please go change your shirt? Or they have the Budweiser T-shirt or the Bud Light T-shirt or whatever it is. So pay attention to the clothing they're wearing. Ask yourself, would I be happy explaining this choice of dress to a camp parent? And if you're a little queasy about it, trust your gut. Ask them to change. It's not a big deal. They need to uphold a very high standard. But that's another insidious element that sort of seeps into the camp culture, and we need to be on the lookout for. Other things that I think you need to be on the lookout for, staff who are asking campers to man up or cowboy up, or in some other way toughen up and keep a stiff upper lip. I'll give you a couple of examples. The counselor who's talking to the homesick boy and says, you just need to tough it out, or you need to cowboy up, or the counselor who's brought his cabin to the ropes course and they're trying to get up the wall, for example. And a bunch of kids are finding it tough, and they're challenged. And instead of processing that in an authentic way, instead of the staff member saying, you look scared. This is, it's not easy to be on the top of a 12-foot wall. What's it going to take? What kind of support do you need from your, from the other boys or from me as your counselor? What's going to help give you the courage to try to face this challenge? That would be a very appropriate response. But what I often see at camps is the counselor who says, come on, be a man. You got to get up there, man up. They'll even say things that are a little more crude, like, I'm talking about a counselor, talking to an 8-year-old or a 10-year-old. Come on, buddy, you got to grow a pair. Have some sack. And what this is communicating to boys is, it's not okay to be scared. It's not okay to be frightened. What you have to do is realize that, if you have, if you're a boy and this is your anatomy and you have XY chromosomes, there are certain implications for what you can say or do. You better not cry. You better not complain. And when you're faced with a challenge, don't let anyone know that this might be frightening for you. That sort of socializing of boys is terribly destructive. So be on the lookout for the counselor who is just telling kids to toughen up in response to an emotional challenge like homesickness, or a behavioral challenge like getting up a ropes course element. These are the times when we want to provide some authentic empathy. These are the times when you want to say, you know what, getting up this wall, this isn't easy. Or, you know what, everybody misses something about home. homesickness can really hurt. And that's a great place to start, and that's a wonderful example that a man or a guy, a young man, can set for a camper. I'm going to think about other sorts of behaviors that may negatively impact a camp's ability to deliver, all the youth development. So I've talked about language, I've talked about dress, and I've talked about the interaction between campers and staff. If I think of some other examples, I'll come back to it, but I see that there are lots of other questions posted here. Here's the next one. What challenges should camp directors be? Oh, no, that's the same one. That got retyped. All right, let's look at another one. We commonly form cabin groups by age. What are the most approximate age breaks that we should consider from a developmental standpoint? That's a great question. Again, this person's writing in about cabin groups by age. Well, first of all, I think that cabin groups or any other kind of grouping by age is probably better than grouping by grade, because you have some younger kids in a grade, maybe they even skipped a grade. You have some kids who stayed back who may be extra self-conscious if you divide things by grade. Rather than keying things to scholastic achievement, which grade level segmenting does, I would suggest that you do as this person is writing, that you segment things by age. Now, if we take a group of 10-year-olds, some of them haven't started puberty, some of them have. The same thing if we took a group of 12-year-olds or 14-year-olds. Physical development and pubertal development, as well as emotional and cognitive development, vary tremendously. So let me begin by saying we're fooling ourselves if we think that all 10-year-olds or all 12-year-olds are the same. In fact, you're going to have some campers who are 15 and haven't even started puberty. It's a wide range. But let's say that you have an overnight camp where your youngest are probably 8 and your oldest are probably 15 or maybe 16. If you were going to create 3 groups, I would say 8, 9, and 10-year-olds have many of the same concerns. 11, 12, and some 13-year-olds have many of the same concerns. And then sort of 13, 14, 15-year-olds or 14 and 15-year-olds have many of the same concerns. So there's a natural break, I think, between 10 and 11 and a natural break between 12 and 13. If you wanted to create 5 groups, then now you can really customize things. I would have maybe 8, 9, and 10-year-olds together, and then you can have 11, 12, 13, 14 all together. If you have a day camp, your youngest campers might be 3 or 4, in which case I think there's a natural segmentation between sort of right around the time when kids end kindergarten. So you might keep your 4 and 5-year-olds together, and then kindergarten is a sort of break. I know I talked about not segmenting by scholastic ability, but there is a big difference between 5 and 6-year-olds. So 5 and younger, and then maybe 6 to 8 would be a natural segmentation. The other thing I would say is, it doesn't matter that I have a PhD in child psychology. Your camp's program is, naturally interacting with the attendees. And if you find that the way you've segmented things doesn't marry appropriately with the activities and the traditions and rituals that you have at your camp, then I would segment it differently. I hesitate to be prescriptive here because you want to meet the developmental needs of your campers, and that's going to vary from one program to another. So I've given you the rough guidelines that I think have merit, but I want to encourage you to see how it works. All right, let's see. The next question is this. In Michael Thompson's book, Raising Cain, he has a segment about play fighting. We've watched the PBS video with our staff. This is one area where our staff sometimes have a hard, this is the one area where our staff sometimes have a hard time. Any thoughts on pretend or dramatic play fighting and how it relates to camp? Wow, that's it. This is so much fun for me. These are wonderful questions. These are fantastic questions. Let me just pause for a second, because if people don't know what video we're talking about, let me show you a copy. So if you don't have Michael Thompson's book, here's the book here. There we go. Raising Cain, Protecting the Emotional Lives of Boys. It's excellent. And as you can see, Michael Thompson wrote this. He co-authored it with Dan Kindlin. So I would highly recommend this book. And then the PBS video that we're talking about is this guy right here. Okay, and in the video, there's a lot of revealing footage and a lot of really good discussions with young people. It's been a while since I've watched the video, but I can certainly respond to this question. I'm going to start with a little bit of an anecdote from my own experience as a father. I'm a huge Star Wars fan, all right, true disclosure, a little geeky. I'm not as big a Star Trek fan, so don't get any ideas, but I love Star Wars, and I was eager to show it to my own boys, who are now 7 and 9. So they were, I got to think here, they were 4 and 6 when we watched the first one, when we watched episode 4. That was made in 1976 or 1977. So excited to share this with them, but forgetting that there are some pretty violent scenes. I don't know when the last time you watched Star Wars was, but for example, there's one scene where Luke comes back to his foster home, and his aunt and uncle are lying as charred skeletons on the ground there, and I'm thinking to myself, wow, I'm not sure if I'd remember this scene, whether this was good for a 4 and a 6-year-old to see. But more to the point of this question, there's a good amount of shooting and of course sword fighting with the lightsabers. And one very interesting thing that I observed after just watching half the movie and then, watching my kids during unstructured free play the next day is they wanted swords right away. They wanted to act this out. One of them wanted to be Obi-Wan. One of them wanted to be Luke Skywalker. So I went down to my wood shop and I was making them, wooden lightsabers, and they absolutely loved it. And the same may have happened with a girl. If I had 2 girls, 4 and 6, it may have been the same. But the reason I'm telling you this story is it was extraordinarily revealing to me about the ways in which boys process what they observe in the world. In particular, how do they process observations of violence? And one of the ways that we all wrap our minds around seeing violence is to play act it ourselves. So here I want to make an important distinction. There are many teenagers and young adults who play violent video games like Grand Theft Auto, but they don't go out and steal cars, and they don't go out and pimp women, fortunately, right? But these are scenes that are regularly portrayed in that video game and others like it. So you have to ask yourself, what are the ways in which boys and men, and again, we could also here be talking about girls and women, but the vast majority of participants in violent video games like Grand Theft Auto are boys. So let's be real. What's the difference between the boy who watches media violence like Star Wars or a violent video game and acts it out in an appropriate way? This question refers to pretend or dramatic play. And the boy who sees it and actually goes into the world and hurts somebody? And the answer is the boy who play acts the violence has had an adult contextualize that experience for them. Let me say what I mean by that. It's probably difficult, and some of you I know object to the fact that I showed this violent movie to my boys when they were at quite a young age. I myself had misgivings about it once I had done it. But I was there, and I was watching it with them, and that was the most important thing. So I was able to provide some commentary. That is to say, I was able to contextualize this violence. I was able to take the remote, press pause, turn to them and ask them, what do you think about the fact that, you know, Luke hit this person? Or why did Obi-Wan take out his lightsaber and cut the arm off this alien? Or, you know, gee, Luke looks very sad that his aunt and uncle have died. And I know some of you were thinking like, oh my gosh, it must be, you know, it must be a terrible experience to watch a movie with Chris Thurber or any other psychologist. But the point I'm trying to make is we are going to create two groups of boys, those who imitate violence and those who play act it. And we don't want them to imitate it. We would rather have them play act it so they can process it, so they can experience a simulation of what might this have been like, and in that way become more emotionally intelligent. But it requires the presence of an adult. If an adult isn't there to provide commentary and contextualize the medium, whether that's a film or a video game or a magazine or something else, then we leave up to chance the way in which that boy is going to respond. What's crucial is that that boy takes that information and processes it in a way that makes him more resilient, that helps him distinguish between fantasy and reality, and that helps him understand, you know, a real man doesn't resolve conflict by beating somebody up or shooting them with a laser gun. A real man is going to say, there's a way we can work this out, and it's not going to be easy. It might be complicated. A real man is going to say, I see something out there that I want, but I can't steal it. You know, a real man is going to say, this is the gentlemanly way to treat a girl or a woman. Right? In order for that education to occur, we as adult male role models need to be present with our boys when they are exposing themselves to different media, including violent media. So to this question, I think that dramatic play, pretend play, is an important way for boys to experience some of what they see and witness in the world. And forget video games, forget films, just turn on CNN. What are we hearing about now? We're hearing about, you know, Trayvon Martin being shot. And who knows exactly what the context of that was, but you don't have, you know, you turn on the TV, listen to stories about people dying here in the United States, in Syria, all over the world. And so exposure to violence has been around since there have been people. It's changed slightly in style, but people are dying and people are killing each other across the world. We need, as men, to help our boys understand this, and if they want to pretend play, if they want to have dramatic play fighting, you need to recognize, I believe, as a father, as a psychologist, as a youth development professional, that what they're doing when they're play acting is trying to understand the fantasy-reality distinction. So as long as you're there to monitor the play and make sure that it doesn't get out of hand, as long as you're there to have a conversation with them about, you know, guys, certainly lightsabers or guns, one way to end a conflict. What's the way we do it here at camp? How do we resolve conflict in this environment? That's the important conversation to have. So the play acting, I understand why your staff, you know, have a difficult time with it, but I think it's okay as long as you're there to contextualize it. All right, so we've got 10 minutes to go, and we've got a couple more really good questions. The next one is, oftentimes, when talking about the healthy masculinity, what gets focused on are what masculinity is not. It's not stoicism, it's not emotional detachment, as the video said, women's work. My question is, what would you say are some characteristics that are specifically masculine as opposed to feminine? Well, first of all, there are some characteristics that are just human, and I don't want to characterize them as feminine or masculine. So being kind, being unselfish, being helpful. And whether you look to the New Testament, the Old Testament, the Quran, or some other place as your reference, there are plenty of spiritual anchor points for these human characteristics that I think represent being a healthy human. Forget masculine or feminine. So as I said, things like kindness, things like unselfishness, things like eschewing materialism, these are just great qualities to possess, period. And we don't have to characterize them as masculine or feminine. But I mentioned earlier, and I'm going to reiterate some of the things that I think are positive qualities that are specifically or more characteristically masculine. And I'll hasten to add, I think it's wonderful if women embrace these qualities as well. But I think that a positive masculine role model is someone who is, first of all, willing to take healthy risks, that wants to challenge themselves and express their emotions, before, during, and after, who's going to say, wow, I think I can do this. I want to set a really high goal for myself, but I'm hesitant, and here are the challenges that I foresee. A healthy masculine role model not only is someone who is emotionally expressive and willing to embrace healthy challenges, but specifically masculine, who treats other men and women fairly, who believes that there are no gender limitations to what a person can do. So it doesn't matter that I happen to be a man or happen to be a woman, or that you happen to be a boy or a girl. You can do anything you set your mind to. One of the only differences between men and women has to do with the average man having more upper body strength than the average woman. Well, so then if that's a masculine characteristic, how do we use that, for good? Well, what can be done? How can you be additionally helpful? How can you use your physical strength in service to other people? If you can figure out some ways to do that, then I think that's a very positive masculine attribute. But I particularly like this question because I don't want us to think of our roles as men as, well, don't do this, don't do that, don't be stoic, don't be this. Instead, I want us to think about it in a positive way. Be expressive, be joyful, embrace challenge, talk about your emotions, care for other people, be physically affectionate in appropriate ways. These are all things that I think are positive male qualities, and they can apply equally well to females. The next question says, I work with, this is like the speed round because we don't have much time left. I work with a co-ed camp. How do I get boys to attend camp to start with? They seem very reluctant to take that initial step. Most boys are going to listen to their peers more than they're going to listen to an adult who's counseling them about the kinds of experiences they should have. So if you can take some of the boys that attend your co-ed camp and get some video testimonials and share those on your website or with potential attendees, I think that's going to help you get more boys enrolled. I also would make sure that at your camp there are experiences that are just for girls and that they can benefit from healthy female role models and some girl time, as well as experiences that are just for boys, and they can benefit from some male role models and some boy time. I think that's really good. The next question is, we have female staff working with our boy campers. Michael talks about boy fun, and women see that as dumb fun or ridiculous fun. What's the best way to help female staff understand this boy fun? That's a great question. It's one of my favorite scenes in this video is the male staff with boys climbing all over them, and they're tossing them into the water, and they're throwing them, and then there's that boy throwing rocks, and not every female staff member would see that as ridiculous. But there are many female staff members who might be reluctant to engage in the kind of rough and tumble play that boys enjoy. I know a lot of women, and I work with a lot of girls at our sister camp, and a little known secret is that they burp and fart and make these scatological jokes as much as I ever hear the boys doing. So I'm not sure it's as big a difference as Michael makes it out to be. I think people who enjoy having fun in life, whether they're a man or a woman or a boy or a girl, like having ridiculous fun. But I think you help your female staff understand this by saying, look, it's normal for boys, and I think for girls too, but certainly for boys, to want to have a lot of silly, playful, juvenile, I mean, we even have a word for it, puerile, right, which comes from the Latin puer, which means boy. When we say, something is puerile, we mean it's, silly and juvenile, but in a boy way. Let them know that it's normal and encourage them to take part in it. I think whether you have male or female staff, you want them to be playful and to enjoy some of the puerile behavior that both the boys and the girls engage in. But let them know it's also okay. If there are things they don't want to do, your female staff, that's understandable. It's hard to imagine a parallel scene where there's a female staff member with boys crawling all over her and she's, tossing them off. I think it's also fine to say, look, there are some things, some activities that are better suited for our male staff to do with our boys than there are for our female staff to do with our boys. But that doesn't mean that it's bad. We just want to customize the experience for these boys in the best way we know how, and in a way that makes our staff comfortable. The next question is, it says, a great way to help staff learn to share appropriately is to ask for miracle moments. That is times where the mission of camp worked to help a camper grow. That's a wonderful comment. Let me just restate that. Try to acknowledge the times in which the camp's mission worked to help a camper grow. That's going to sensitize your staff to the ways in which your mission is put into practice. Another comment says, also, this helps them to be aware of camp's role in development more so than simply a place for fun. Very true, very true. We talk about intentionally designing our camp program. Let's make sure that on the back end, we're intentional about debriefing our camp program and making sure that we've explained, well, we have this mission. It's not just words on paper. This is actually what it looks like when it's put into practice. I think that's a great comment. The next one says, one way to consider this question of counselors as parents is to have a camp parent talk with staff, about the value of camp and the impact of camp and the responsibility of the staff. Yes. If you sign up for Expert Online Training, you'll see that one of the videos I made is called Speaking of Camp, and I do just that. I train the camera lens on parents, and I ask them to talk about these things: the value of camp, the responsibility that the staff have, the impact that the camp experience has on their kids. I really encourage you to have your staff watch that video. Again, the title is Speaking of Camp. The next one says, how long does a long-term gay male staff member, how does a long-term gay male staff member fit into the scenario of healthy masculinity at camp? I'm glad somebody asked that question. My answer is they fit in perfectly well. Kudos to you that you have an out gay male staff member. I think that sexuality shouldn't have a bearing on whether or not you work at camp or what your role is at camp. I mean, if I could wave a magic wand, somebody's sexual orientation wouldn't matter in their work with youth. I think the only way that it might matter is if some parents have a dim view of homosexuality or bisexuality, and as far as I'm concerned, that's their problem, not our problem. And I realize like I said, if I could wave a magic wand, I work with a lot of staff at hundreds of camps across the country, and some of those male and female staff are gay, and they don't let their sexual orientation influence the way in which they work with campers or young people. They set a wonderful example. They follow all the camp rules. They live by the camp's motto or mission, and so it's, in my mind, if it's done well, it's a non-issue. Just as we ask our heterosexual staff not to let their sexual orientation or personal details about their romantic lives seep into their work with young people. So we would ask the same thing of a gay or bi staff member or a transgendered staff member. So I want this gay male staff member to keep working at your camp and to keep setting a good example for young people. I think it's great, and I don't think it has much bearing. It's one of many different important masculine role models that your campers will encounter. And in case I haven't said it explicitly yet, there's no one best masculine role model. This isn't a cookie cutter type scenario. Just as we don't want people to feel cornered by their gender, like I happen to be a man or I happen to be a woman, so this is the way I need to act, or there are certain careers that I can and can't do. We also don't want sexual orientation to ever be a barrier for someone in their professional life. The key is that we all, regardless of our sexual orientation, make a separation between our personal lives and our professional lives. And so there you have it. All right, next question or next comment. We have 2 more minutes. In your opinion, where is the line that should be drawn when discussing sexual development between counselors and campers, especially with older campers? So I guess it took us 50 minutes to get to the sex questions, but here we go. That's tricky. Parents don't enroll their kids at camp because they want them to have sex ed. They're either leaving that to the public school system or the public school systems in which that's permitted, and it's the biology teacher or it's the health educator, or if they're smart parents, they're doing it themselves. They're providing the education about sexuality themselves, and maybe that's supplemented by something that the kids are getting in school. But what I say to camp staff is, your primary responsibility is not a health educator. Your primary responsibility is as a mentor, a coach. There are lots and lots of activities here at camp. Maybe you're teaching swimming or archery, but you're not teaching sex ed. I don't see it in the job description anywhere. So when you get the questions from your older campers about, maybe your personal life, are you a virgin? Or maybe there are questions about pubertal development. Again, if it's a girls' camp, it's going to be, when did you get your period? If it's boys' camp, it's going to be, when did you have your first wet dream? But the point is, these are great questions, and parents are most comfortable answering them themselves. So what the safest sort of thing for a camp staff member to do is to praise their curiosity, but deflect the question to parents. In other words, a stock answer to any question of a sexual or personal or sensitive nature is, you know what, that's a wonderful question. I completely understand your curiosity and why this is on your mind, and I want that question to be answered. I think that your parents are probably the best folks to answer that question. Now, in your mind, privately, you may be thinking to yourself, I don't know if the parents are going to do a good job answering this or not. I'm going to try, and I might be able to give a great answer. The risk of having a staff member answer a question of a sexual nature is that it might make some parents a little uneasy. So you as a director need to decide, do you want your staff members to answer those questions honestly, or do you want them to praise the curiosity and deflect it to parents? I'll let you make that question, but there are definitely options available. All right, so last one, and these are great. There are going to be a couple of questions that go unanswered, but I want to be sensitive to the time. What about competitiveness? How does staff best model appropriate competitiveness versus allowing overzealous competitiveness? I wrote an article for the free giveaway magazine that the ACA did called Camp, and the title of the article was, Healthy Competition is Not an Oxymoron. In that article, I argued that we should be able to win with humility and lose with grace. And whether you're on the losing team or the winning team, you should cheer the other team. That, I think, is healthy competition. I think it becomes overzealous when you're rubbing the other team's nose in it. I think it becomes overzealous when it becomes physically aggressive. It's easy to get a lot of kids in a big group hyped up about, let's crush them, let's kill them, let's bury the other team. I want to go back to the language and the wording that you choose. It's one thing to win. It's another thing to kill the other team. And I know you don't literally mean to kill, but you got to ask yourself, what do we want to be instilling? What is the image that we want to be part of healthy competition at our camp? So if you want to email me, Chris@expertonlientraining.com, and I'll send you a copy of that article, or you can visit my website, which is campspirit.com. We need to wrap up. There are some questions that weren't answered. I do want to encourage you to send me an email. You can write to me through the site, expertonlientraining.com. I want to just thank our 30 participants for joining us. This is really exciting. We're going to have more of these webinars, so stay tuned. It was really fun for me to respond to your questions and comments. I hope you enjoyed the video from Michael Thompson. Look for part 2 to become available. And I want to encourage you to explore the other educational content that we have on expertonlinetraining.com. So once again, thank you for your participation. Have a great Tuesday. Have a wonderful camp season. Thanks for doing what you do. I'm Dr. Chris Thurber. Take care.